Hey everyone, 1 second quick video that goes along with the percent proportions. So in the last video I talked about the is over of, but you're not always going to see those specific words in a word problem. So what I want to take a look at is percent proportion with a word problem. Okay, so we want to do a percent proportion with a word problem. So remember, it's is over of is your percent out of 100 for your percent proportion. This is the exact same thing, part over whole equals your percent out of 100, okay? So that's the same thing. So I'll give you a second to write that down. Okay, so these are basically the same exact thing. So I just have that arrow going back and forth. All right, so let's take a look at a specific example. So if we have the movie theater has 250 seats. $200 seats were sold. For the current movie. What percent of seats are empty? Okay, so just like we did with the other one, we want to identify our three parts. So in this case, we're identifying our part, our whole. So we want to identify the part, we want to identify the whole, and we want to identify the percent. And we want to figure out also what it is that we are being asked to find. So what are we looking for in this case? All right, so remember, read your question 3 times. The movie theater has 250 seats. 200 seats were sold for the current movie. What percent of seats are empty? So I read it once just to kind of get an idea what it was. Then I read it a second time so I can really think about what it is that they're asking me to do, and then a third time just to double check to make sure I know what it is I have to do. So if a movie theater has 250 seats, so again, I always look for my numbers and see what it's telling me. So here I have 250 seats. 200 of those were sold. So then I look at this, 200 seats were actually sold. Here I see the word what percent of seats are empty. So that's a key word there as well. So now I go through and I figure out, okay, I have my important information. Now I want to figure out which one is which. So they have 250 seats. That's going to be my whole. That's how many total seats there are in the theater. It says 200 of those were sold. So 200 out of the 250 were sold. And I'm going to put sold there. Now it says what percent. Remember we talked about in the other video what indicates that I need a variable. So that's going to be X. In this question, when I see all of my information, I read what they're asking me in the last line, what percent of seats are empty? So we're looking for the empty seats. So now that we have all of our information, we're going to set it up into our proportion that we have. So we have part over whole equals percent over 100. So our part is 200. Over our whole is 250. Equals, here we're looking for the percent over 100. Now before I solve this, I can see that I can simplify this fraction because I have a 0 here and a 0 here. So that gives me 20 over 25. Now I can also divide each of these by 5. 20 divided by 5 gives me 4, and 25 divided by 5 gives me 5. So I've simplified it to make it easier for me to solve. So now what I have is 4 over 5 equals x over 100. We could use cross products here, but I see that 5 times 20 will give me 100. So if I multiply my denominator by 20, I multiply the top by 20. So I end up with x equals 80%. Now, the last part of this says, what am I looking for? I'm looking for the empty seats. This percentage represents the number that was sold. So if 80% were sold, that means that if I do 100% minus 80%, that means that 20% are still empty. So this would be your final answer, 20% empty.